Why some humanists reject the Bible. Hey guys, it's Jhon. I'm sitting here in my studio today, and I wanted to hop on and talk about this article I just read, Some Reasons Why Humanists Reject the Bible by Joseph Summers. I found the article really interesting, so I thought I'd share some of the aspects of it and talk about what he discussed in the article. Just kind of share it, and so you guys can hear another perspective on the Bible and religion in general. He first talks about the concept that humanists reject the idea that the Bible is the Word of God. You know, they're convinced the Bible is written solely by humans, and he terms it as in an ignorant, superstitious, and cruel age. It's something that I've often said when I've talked about the Bible. You know, it's from a time period and from an era where it was superstitious and ignorant in the sense that they didn't have a lot of knowledge about a lot of things, and definitely was a cruel age, definitely an age of corporal punishment and subjugation by ruling dictators and ruling religious leaders as well. The humanists think that the Bible was written in an unenlightened era, and it is filled with errors and a lot of harmful teachings, specifically harmful teachings. They think that it actually can stop a human from moving forward in their expression of their humanity. There are reasons why they hold these negative views, and I think that discussion about it is important because of the fact that the Bible nowadays is often thought to be the inerrant word of God and infallible, but there's so many things in the Bible that are contradictory. And when you look at Bible scholars who talk about the history of the Bible, the concept of infallibility or inerrancy is actually laughable, because the Bible itself is such a mishmash of writings from different times and different peoples with different beliefs even. So it's a fascinating idea that this book is so followed, and yet the book itself is unfollowable because of all of the contradictions. In this article, it talks about a lot of how the televangelists talk about the Bible is a guidebook for politics, business, families, and affairs of mankind. We've seen now, especially in our time period, we've seen politicians lean into this idea that their political actions should be based upon this Bible that is so completely flawed that it comes from the idea of, as Dan McClellan would say, negotiation with meaning. So you read the Bible and you have to negotiate what its meaning is, because the meanings are so not obvious. They're very much a structure. For example, one of the passages that they use against homosexuality is the idea that they say, tell them to come out of the house so we may be with them. And the negotiation for people who are against homosexuality, or is that the words to be with them means have sex with. But it's not what the Bible says. That's not what the book says. But people interpret it and negotiate it into this their belief system, that it's because Paul said, marriage between a man and a woman. And so it really comes down to this idea that you can't go to say the Bible is inerrant because of the fact that there are so many interpretations and so many negotiations with the text that it becomes structurally impossible to follow. And now, because of the fact that our country has gotten so divided along the lines of the Bible, and the political structures behind the Bible have gotten so powerful, that to say anything contrary to what they're saying is very rarely heard and often criticized to the point of being shut down. I think we're at a time in our lives where things are changing dramatically. I mean, my channel itself shows you that people are looking for a different way, because my channel itself talks about the idea that the Bible is not accurate in any way, but there are good things in it. So it's a matter of looking at the perspective and saying the fact that I can actually say these things now, and the people who actually come at me hard are no longer as numerous as they were in the past. In this article, he talks about the fact that 30% of Americans believe the Bible is the Word of God, its teaching should be taken literally. Now, I think that's probably a high number. I think it's actually lower than that now because over the past 20 years, Christian churches have lost 54% of their congregations. I think that number is based upon the idea that when they did the study on world religions, 30% of the world were Christian. So I think the numbers in this article are based upon the 30% Christianity thing. But as I said, they've lost 54% of their congregations over the past 20 years. And on top of that, of the 30% who identify as Christians, less than half of them actually follow Christianity. There is a certain percentage of Americans and people worldwide who think the book is inspired by God, but thinks the verses should be interpreted symbolically. And I tend to be closer to that camp, but I tend to come from the aspect of, as I've often said, put my love goggles on and read the loving parts and live into the loving parts. Most people think the book has moral truths and give the Bible a really great respect because of the fact that they've had a society that gives it such great respect all the time. He talks about the idea that the Bible is often viewed as the word of a just and omniscient God, and society's laws and social practices are often based upon biblical teachings. But they believe that serious error and harm will occur because of the fact the Bible was written by fallible humans who lived in an unenlightened era. And so the Bible shouldn't be taken as a guidebook. And it definitely does not lead to human happiness and well-being. It perpetuates the idea of ignorance and superstitions of the past and prevents humanity from rising to a higher level. Now, that's directly quoted from his article. This article also brings out a lot of ideas of contradictions within the Bible. And because of the contradictions within the Bible, it's an unreliable authority. He has several examples of contradictions. And if you have a contradiction, one of them has to be false. So the inerrancy of the Bible falls into question immediately because now, as I've said in other videos, there's two ways that Judas died and the three different stories about walking on water. So it comes down to understanding that it can't be the inerrant word. It can't be infallible. So it's got to be more stories and ideas that are being placed about. Even the Old Testament has been proven to be false. Dan McClellan, the Bible scholar who I'm a big fan of, literally said that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 come from two different source texts and they're in the wrong order. So we look at the Old Testament contradictions. There's so many differences. In this article, it talks about Genesis 1 says the first man and woman were made at the same time after the animals. But Genesis 2 says that man was created, then the animals, and woman was created last. Genesis 1 says there's 6 days of creation. Genesis 2 says the day the Lord made the earth and the heavens. And so it talks about the idea of it being a single day. Genesis 1 claims that God created light and divided it from darkness on the first day. But in the same book of Genesis 1, several passages later, it says this, the moon, the sun, and the stars weren't made until the fourth day. It comes down to this idea that we find these contradictions everywhere. And the worldwide flood, right? Genesis says God ordered Noah to bring every living thing of all flesh, two of every sort, into the ark. But Genesis 7 says the Lord ordered Noah to take an ark, the clean beasts and the birds of sevens, and only the unclean beasts by twos. So once again, we're finding all these contradictions, and there's so many of them that they have listed in this article that I could go through. Even the story of King David calls into question because of contradictions, and that's important to Christianity because they claim that he is the son of David. He is of the line of David. So there's so many different attempts to make David the bloodline of the Messiah. And so the contradictions make that all fall into question. If you search online for reasons why humanists reject the Bible by Joseph Summers, Sommers, you'll find this article and you'll see the list of contradictions. It's numerous. It goes on and on and on, talking about the various contradictions of the Bible itself. And as you start to read it, you start to see, oh my gosh, look at all these contradictions. Because it really shows that the contradictions themselves means the inerrancy of the Bible is impossible, because it completely contradicts itself over and over again. Another reason why humanists reject the Bible is because of all the cruelty and the subjugations and the legal systems. The story of Lot. These people come to the house to find out who these visitors are in the house, and according to Christians, they said have them come out so we can have sex with them, which I mentioned earlier. No matter what they were doing, having them come out of the house, Lot offers his daughter instead of risking being a bad host to his guests. So he offers his daughter for sex, or for subjugation, because that's the rule. It's better to give his daughter up than to be an inhospitable host of the time. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it's such a cruel time period, such a mean time period. People often ask me, what was it like back then because of my past aggression, and my response is always the same. It's imagine living in Afghanistan right now with the Taliban. You had militant rule, which would have been Rome, and you had religious rule. Now combine Taliban into both of them, and that's what you've got. Women being subjugated, a very hard life, and that really comes down to that's really the way it was back then, but without any modern amenities. So it was even probably more suffering at the time. But the Bible literally talks about the idea of, you can do cruel things. You can stone people, God sent the 2 bears to kill 42 children because they made fun of a bald man. That's just cruelty. And the God of the Bible can't be a loving God if that's the case. It literally gives the moral precepts of harming innocent people. The Old Testament especially talks about how this army wiped out that army, so God was obviously with this army. So when you look at the idea of the harm and the judgment and the struggles that it does to innocent people, this article gives a list of all of the struggles that it's done. It also talks about, the Old Testament talks about the vengeful and jealous God, and the New Testament talks about the loving God, but in all of them, they talks about how God can be harsh and cruel and judge and be unfair and heartless. And it becomes this very much fear-based struggles, and humanists don't believe in that ideology. And in fact, they consider the biblical God as having the morals of a sociopathic mass murderer because of all the murder. And one of the quotes that I find really interesting is when you read the Bible, Satan is supposed to be the bad guy. Satan kills 10 people in the Bible, and God kills over 2 million. Which one's the bad one within the Bible? Another thing in the Bible is people may do something wrong, but God has a disproportional response and just blasts it out. It's like lying, and then he kills your entire family kind of thing. That's not in the Bible, but it's kind of the idea that his response was too big for the crime committed. And what's interesting about that ideology is because that is how the Romans worked in that time. You spit on me, I stab you in the eye. It's kind of a bigger and bigger response than necessary for the punishment. But they do that to subjugate the people and to have them be afraid of doing anything against a ruling power. So the time period was very ripe with that kind of system of justice. And so it ended up in that Bible, which is why the humanists talk about it coming from an uneducated and ancient time that did not have the concept of balance. It was more about we're going to knock things down. And so the Bible promotes that ideology. Humanists also struggle with the idea that the Bible's claims are inconsistent with the laws of nature and believe the teaching that those things that are inconsistent with the laws of nature is harmful because it gives people ideas that they can do things they can't do. This is in some way where we part with my beliefs because I've seen things happen that are inconsistent with the laws of nature. I've watched people heal themselves. So, this is where humanists and I kind of part company because I think it's all far simpler. And I think the laws of nature themselves are just observations by scientists with theories. And so I look at it from the perspective of, what do I believe and what am I creating? And that's how I create my life. And so, but they look at it as being actually harmful to teach people the kind of things I teach. They lean very heavily into the immutable natural laws. And so what they're leaning very heavily into is what scientists say are real. But every day, science gets proven wrong somewhere, gets proven right somewhere too. This idea of even the Big Bang theory, scientists started saying it's not a theory, it's what happened. Then they put the James Webb telescope up there, and James Webb comes back and says, well, maybe it didn't happen that way. So, science is ever changeable and immutable, is mutable. It's not immutable. It actually does change and alter through time. So the idea of thinking that science itself is infallible, to me, is just yet another dogma. It's another doctrine that they follow, and that's their choice. And this article, once again, goes through a whole list of big spiritual encounters or big spiritual manifestations and lists them as myth to support belief. And for a lot of it, I believe that's a correct statement. The idea that it could be a myth instead of an actual true fact. I've mentioned that on several other videos. And people will come back and argue with me that, no, it's fact. But, you live into what you believe. For me, I've come to the point that the story of Jeshua is so much better than the miracle stories because he showed us what he discovered. He showed us his divinity. He showed us our ability to be more loving, more caring, and create a world that is more loving and caring. And so I think the fact that he showed us our divinity through his experiences of what he found, as opposed to being a deity or a supernatural being, really is a better story because it's more empowering, as opposed to the story of him being a deity, son of God, being a disempowering thing that we are subjugated to, and which is very much what a lot of the religions of the time wanted. They wanted people subjugated to the religion so that they could control the masses. Humanists believe that the supernatural events don't warrant belief, and they dismiss them as directly opposed to the laws of nature, and so they are harmful to teach. And in being harmful to teach, they literally think that it's harming the world. Humanists also, in this idea of the supernatural, talk about the idea that people of faith tend to disregard science when it comes to disease. In that disregarding, they've actually perpetuated a disease by not doing what science has said. When I look at that, the concept of disease in that way, I always go back to the word disease, right? Dis-ease, not being in health, or being not in ease. When I look at the idea of the things I've witnessed being healed in my life and the things I've healed in my personal life, I look at it from the perspective of I healed when I didn't take the doctor's advice. In fact, the last time I was struggling with a health concern, the doctor gave me 5 or 6 different diagnoses, and all of them were wrong. And so his science did not work for me. It wasn't until I left the doctor and took control of my own experience that I healed. And it was literally an interesting thing because I healed using food, changing my diet, or altering things that I was eating. He never mentioned food, and yet every doctor takes the Hippocratic Oath And Hippocrates said, let food be a remedy. So it comes down to this idea that even scientists are no longer following science, because science of Hippocrates is very different from the chemicals that they're using now. So, but as I've often said, we live in an illusion of belief. These atoms are the experience of the walls that I live in and the air and the eyes that I'm looking from. And so if you put faith in the healing of the medicines, they'll work. That's why placebos work. So humanists are very black and white thinking about this, saying that there is nothing supernatural. It's all natural law. They also talk about the idea that the Christian doctrines opposed Galileo's proof that the earth rotates on its axis and revolves around the sun, and that the Catholic Church forgave him in 1986 for the world not being flat. And so, I understand why they're harping on that ideology. What's interesting is just like many other religions, humanists are focused on the past rather than living present, and so their argument here is all about what the religious structures have done in the past and what they're doing in the past, and they're calling out the past as this. But as in any ideology, any dogma, they're focused on their foundations coming up. Because of that, their argument is always about the past. That which makes sense in the regards that all religion is based in the past. If you really think about it, all religion is based on somebody else's spiritual experience. And when you look at it from that perspective and you realize you take control of your own experience, life changes dramatically. So it really comes down to the idea of you stepping into your power. And no matter whether you're going to lean into science or humanism or religion, take with you your power and don't let anybody take your power from you. Summer states, in the view of the Bible's numerous mistaken beliefs about the physical world, there's no reason to think that its writers were any more correct about unseen and abstract matters, being so greatly in error regarding the tangible and observable universe. The Bible cannot be considered a reliable guide for spiritual and ethical issues. To me, there's a great accuracy in that statement. I think it comes down to what kind of world do you want to live in? You want to live in a loving world or a caring world? Then if that is the case, then you need to put the Bible down and start living into a loving world as opposed to living into the inerrancy of a book written in a time period that very much was into corporal punishment and stonings and unloving things. The Bible leans into those things in a very big way. And I think it's important to realize that the Bible itself is heavily flawed, and those flaws can definitely harm our experience of life. As in all things, there is some truth to be found, and in humanism, there's some things I agree with, and there's some things I don't agree with. But it's a matter of me finding my truth and my experience in that truth. And I judge everything from my own personal experiences. And you've heard me talk on my channel about things I've created into my life and my life experiences and all those things. A lot of what this article talks about, they would never believe anything I'm saying, because a lot of my stories that I tell about, which happened to me in life, they would have no explanation for, because of the fact that they don't necessarily meet the laws of nature. And so it's kind of an interesting element, but they're more than welcome to go that way, because that's what I believe. Everyone is on their own path. Another thing that they talk about is the idea that the Bible's full of all these prophecies, but the prophecies themselves are up to interpretation. People add stories to the Bible. The rapture's not in the Bible, but they added a story because of a prophecy. They embellished a story by creating this new other story of the rapture. That is an absolute one of the absolute cornerstones of a humanist view of the Bible, is that prophecies haven't come true. And so the idea that the prophecies haven't come true in the humanist view is absolute proof that it's not something to put your faith in. When you look at the Bible and you come from the one aspect of God is love, which the book of Jhon says, and you apply that to the Bible, there are many statements that can't be inspired by God because they're not loving. Obviously, Old Testament God is vengeful and jealous and punishing. And so when you look at the idea of once again the inerrancy of the Bible, you have to look at the idea of these prophecies and the way they play out. And the information can't be inspired by God because they're all different. But once again, as many Bible scholars say, like Dan McClellan, the majority of the prophecies were believed to be played out in the lifetime of the people who were writing it. So they really thought the end times were coming in their lifetime. Here we are 2,000 years later and nothing's happened. Humanists have a really good point on this one. The Bible also carries a whole bunch of inaccurate claims about history itself. And the humanist position would be that if we know these certain historical facts and the Bible contradicts them, then the Bible once again becomes an unreliable resource. For instance, historians have known for a long time that the story of a worldwide flood is a myth because it's a physical world impossibility. There is evidence worldwide of floods happening, but never all at the same time and never everywhere. And so the worldwide flood is a myth. And one of the reasons they know this is because Egyptologists have proven that there's a thriving culture in Egypt long before Noah that was never interrupted by a flood. And so the worldwide flood could not have possibly happened. There had to be a flood in a region that was affected that probably became a story. And, this guy named Noah or somebody of the period probably threw all his farm animals on a boat to keep them safe. And that's probably where the story comes from, is some story that kind of passed around. And, of course, over time it became a giant fish story. The concept of the Israelites fleeing Egypt from slavery has never been able to be verified historically. They look at these stories as mythological stories to meet a narrative, and it's a narrative that they've chosen. So humanists will definitely discount all of the mythologies that are no longer or in any way verified historically. The Bible also states that humans have only existed for a fairly short amount of years. They say probably a maximum of 10,000 years. But we know historically that humans have been on this earth for over 200,000 years. What I find interesting is the idea that human race is only 10,000 years old coincides directly with the oldest religion in the world, which is Hinduism. So the ideology that man exists and comes into the world comes from this idea of religion and writing it down. And so they had no clue of what came before them. It wasn't until modern archaeology started digging up the past and finding the history of the world. And they're still finding history that makes no sense historically. So even the archaeology of today is getting interrupted and changed every day. And it's a matter of realizing that we don't have all the information. We just don't have it. And it's going to continue to change. So after this article shares a whole bunch of biblical contradictions and historical inaccuracies, this article contends that the writers were very poor historians and they were only conveying messages of an infallible God. That being said, they were literally only speaking of religion as opposed to speaking of history or the story of real mankind. They were leaning into the belief system that they've chosen and trying to give it validity. So to that in itself means that you can't follow it because of their own biases towards their personal religions. Humanists also lean into the idea that we don't know who wrote most of the Bible. It is widely accepted that the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not written by the people who they're attributed to, and they also believe that Matthew, Mark, and Luke all come from the same source text, and then are given the title of Matthew, Mark, and Luke separately. But it's interesting because even in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there are contradictions to each other. So it's got to be coming from different perspectives and different ideas. But historians will tell you that the Bible itself, with probably the exception of some of the Paul stuff, which is fascinating to me because Paul's the only one who never met Joshua in life, and he's also the one who's referred to by Jeshua's brother as the liar. So I don't particularly see Paul as that valid of a source either, because even the disciples of Jeshua disregarded him. So that to me is an interesting element. One of the final assertions that he makes here is that the Bible causes people's personal lives harm, and that should be a really good reason for rejecting the Bible. Now, as I do the work that I do with private sessions, I can completely agree with this statement. I deal with people with self-doubt and self-worth and self-judgment and struggling with the fear of the hell and Satan and all of these very biblical harmful things, and I deal with it on a regular basis. I deal with people who are really struggling because of their religion, because of the Bible. And so humanists reject the Bible because of the harm that is apparent. Now, if you're a scientist and you're looking for empirical evidence, there's a very good empirical evidence that the Bible is harmful for people because it causes a lot of struggle and fear and damnation, and it causes a lot of mental anguish. It really is a harmful document that is a compilation of many harmful documents, and the interpretations themselves can be used for power. And so my interpretation might not be your interpretation, and vice versa. But if you're using it to scare someone into believing the same as you, you're going to find a different meaning in writing in the words of the Bible. And so that to me is a powerful statement as to why you should reject the Bible as well. And I said on another video that we should throw all the books away. And I agree. I still think that. I think that if we can set down the past, nothing changes back there, and we don't know what the meanings were. We set it all down and just start loving one another, the world would change instantly. And that would be huge. So I'd like to end this video by reading Mr. Summers' conclusion, because I think it has a very it's a very good wrap up for this article. If you want to read this article, like I said, Joseph Summers, Reasons Why Humanists Reject the Bible is the article. You just do that Google search, you'll definitely find it. It is filled with Bible quotes and contradictions, and it shows you why they're saying all the things, and it has a real study guide underneath of it as where these sources are coming from. So let me read his conclusion just so you guys can hear his final conclusion, and I'll give my thoughts on it. It says, many compelling and morally sound reasons support the humanist position that the Bible is not divinely inspired. Instead of being inerrant, the Bible has far more errors and immoral teachings than most other books. By treating this mistake-ridden book as the Word of God, humanity has been led down many paths of error and misery throughout history. In too many ways, the Bible continues to produce such results. In some cases, the errors caused by the Bible have been corrected and harms have been stopped. This happened when a scientific approach was applied to the problems. Science involves relying on reason, observation, experience, and compassion, rather than blindly accepting religious or secular dogma. We should reject the views of those who say the Bible has infallible answers to today's problems. As humanists know, science has proved to be a much better source for answers. In many cases, they're right. But like I said, I have created amazing things in my life, and the list of my outcomes is too big to disregard as sheer folly. So there's a lot of what I've learned from my own experience and my own empirical evidence, which is my own observation, my own reason. But as this article says, I don't blindly accept religions or secular dogmas. I literally put my faith in the universe and I working as one. And so when I hear what they say is they're very much leaned into what science says. And I very much lean into what my belief has come to be, which is I am the creator of my experience. And so there's a lot to be said in this. And in being said, it really is another perspective to look at. And if it leans true to you, maybe you're a humanist. Maybe that's your path. Maybe that's your journey. For me, I think there's a little bit more of a spiritual element to it. But I respect their beliefs. And this article was a fascinating read for me. So I hope that makes sense to you guys. You guys have a great day. And I'll talk to you soon. See ya. Bye.